welcome to another episode of Fresh Corduroy. I'm your host, Craig Zolan. This week's guest is Greg Louie, also known as the Ski PT on Instagram. Greg is a physical therapist who focuses practice on skiers. Skiers who want to get stronger for the season and skiers recovering from injury. We talk about the exercise modalities that he employs and the routines that he uses with his clients to help them recover not just physically, but mentally after injury. We also talk about his experience working with the U.S. Para-Alpine Ski Team. It's an interesting conversation. I learned a few things that I'm going to incorporate into my exercise routine, and I hope you do too. Now, let's go get some fresh corduroy with Greg Louie. All right, welcome to the Fresh Corduroy podcast. Today's guest is Greg Louie. Greg, thank you for being on the pod.
Yeah, thanks for having me, Craig. Really appreciate it.
My pleasure. Well, Greg, let's get started with the Greg skiing origin story. How'd you get started skiing? Where and when did you know you were bitten by the bug?
Yeah, totally. So my name's Greg. I grew up in Seattle, Washington, or the greater Seattle area. And the first time I ever remember skiing was when I was around 5 years old. My dad had gone and picked up some skis from a local ski swap. And when it snowed in the city, we went to my elementary school where they have a big grass hill and basically did the classic walk up, ski down, walk up, ski down. And once I got enough reps in to really be able to go down and do that proficiently, then my dad said, all right, well, I think he's ready to go to the ski hill. And the local resort, Snoqualmie, which is about 45 minutes from where I grew up, we had a chance to go out there, and they had a little rope tow that was free at the time. Unfortunately, they don't have that anymore. But that's basically where I was able to progress my skills. And eventually, it was something that we just used to do as a family. And we used to go just a few times a year. I didn't grow up ski racing or anything like that. It was more just like a family bonding activity. And it really wasn't until I finished grad school where I had money to go on my own, where I was like, hey, this is something that I did growing up and I'm super passionate about it, and I actually want to do this a lot more.
So, I was going to say, did the passion sort of manifest itself while you were still a youngster going with your family, or was it, once you had some independence and autonomy, was you recognized that passion?
Yeah, I really think it started with family, and I'm very close to my family. In fact, we still get together about once a month just to hang out and do dinner. But I think the memories that I get back from the trips that we used to go on to, there's so much nostalgia from just hanging out with family and going to travel to Whistler. We had a timeshare up there, so going to a big mountain place where you're just like, wow, this is so grand, and the views that you get from the top of the mountain were just so spectacular that I continued to want to ski. And like a lot of skiers in high school, everyone was switching to snowboarding. So I was like, oh, that's the cool thing to do. So I actually picked up snowboarding through middle school and high school. And I think where it really, really took off was I had an opportunity to work for the summit of Snoqualmie, where I ended up growing up as well. My school on Wednesday, we got out during a half day every Wednesday during the year, and there was a local program where they realized, hey, there's a great opportunity to hire high school students to teach elementary school students. So they would shuttle us up there for free. We'd get a free season's pass, teach for 2 hours, and then get 4 hours after that to free ski on our own, and they would shuttle us back home for free. So a bunch of my friends that I went to high school with ended up saying, hey, let's all do this together, and we would go up every single Wednesday and on the weekends. And that's, I think, when I really caught the bug, where it's like, man, this is something where it's like I can do it a lot and it doesn't have to cost a lot, because I was doing it in a way that was kind of subsidized through the ski school.
Yeah, it sounds like an awesome experience to be able to do that with your friends and, teach little kids and then rip around with your friends, afterwards.
Yeah.
It just sounds awesome.
Yeah, totally.
It sounds like something I would love to do today. So that sort of leads me to the next question, which is you talked about going to graduate school. Presumably that's for your doctor in physical therapy. did you know then that you wanted to focus on skiing, or was it more general, sort of, rehab for all types of individuals, coming back from some sort of, injury?
Yeah, to be honest, going to school, I really had no clue what I was going to do, at least specialty wise. The one thing I did know was I wanted to be a manual therapist because before I got into school, I worked in a clinic where there was a manual therapist and someone that wasn't manual therapy trained. And the manual therapist consistently got their clients better faster. And I was like, wow, if I'm seeing this over and over and over, there's something that he knows that maybe the other people that are working in that clinic don't know. And I want what he knows because I want to help people get better faster. So in the application process, I found this school down in San Diego that they actually specialize in training people to be manual therapists, and I graduated with all the classes to sit for my manual therapy certification. And from there, I also am super passionate about sports. I was like, I want to go into an orthopedic clinic where I work with people that are injured. Maybe they do play a sport, trying to get back to a sport. And I didn't think I was going to work with skiers at all. The thing is, when I was at that clinic, like now I had money to like come back home, and I was like, wow, this is something where I can do it all the time, and I have the flexibility and freedom to do that. I had never really had a paid income before to have that flexibility, and it's something where a lot of my coworkers actually at the same clinic that I worked at also skied, so it kind of just fit the bill. And gradually, as I moved on in various clinics and decided that, hey, I think I need to start my own thing, I hired a coach, and this coach said, Greg, you can't serve everyone. You have to pick a population that you want to serve. So before, I actually was helping like rugby players and just like general sports medicine. And I started an Instagram for sports medicine. The thing is, there's so many people that were doing sports medicine rehab type interventions that I was like, wow, there's a lot of competition, and a lot of these people are 2-3 years ahead of me. So I was like, man, for me to get my name out there, I feel like there's a lot of work to be done and a lot of competition. So I looked into it and I was like, I don't really see anyone doing rehab for skiers year round. There's some people that do it in the winter, but then once ski season ends, they give up on them. And I was like, once skiers get injured, I actually had a season-ending injury. For me, my rehab didn't just end at the end of the season. It continued through the summer until the next season. And I was like, well, who's helping these people in the off season when actually that's when they need the most help, so that way they can get back to the slopes. And I thought, you know what, let's go for it. Let's go all in and start this thing and start making content, seeing what skiers need year round. And from there, that's I think really how it took off.
Interesting. Couple of questions there. One, you mentioned manual therapy as opposed to, I guess, some alternative. What are the different types of therapy? If there's what does manual mean, and what are the alternatives that are out there in the marketplace?
Yeah, great question. So manual therapy, if you break it down, it's just a certain type of techniques where you're using a hands-on approach to change the nervous system or get the individual to move how you want them to move. Ultimately, like if you're just doing manual therapy, a lot of people feel like they get better, but it creates this dependency of the client needing to come back to you. It's almost like you go to a chiropractor, they crack your back, you feel great. A week later, it doesn't feel great because, everything resets, and then you get this cycle of dependency. So a lot of the interventions that I'll do are like soft tissue massage. Now that it's approved in Washington, we can dry needle, we can do cupping, we can do instrument-assisted soft tissue massage, we can do joint manipulation, and a lot more of other interventions to help basically change the nervous system. So one, we can modulate pain or reduce pain. Or the other thing is, like, if a client isn't moving well, we can use a manual therapy intervention to help them get moving in the right way. And then over time, as we facilitate their movement pattern to move how we want them to move, then it becomes the correct way to help reduce whatever ailment is going on. So manual therapy, while it sounds like, hey, I'm just using my hands on, it's a small way for me to help the client like reduce pain and get them to buy into treatment, and then ultimately support it with the corrective exercise to get the end result that we want to get. So I think your question was compared to normal therapy, most therapists will learn some form of manual therapy interventions, but it's mostly just massage versus the residency and fellowship training I went through for manual therapy school. And this is post grad. We look at all the systems. So it's like if someone is coming in with an ankle problem, we're not just looking at the ankle. We need to assess and see, how does the knee, hip, and back also contribute to the ankle problem? How does the nervous system also contribute to the ankle? And even getting like super deep into the various systems, like, hey, do you have like a gut issue that's making your nervous system more highly regulated, and that's like ramping up your pain scale? So it's a really big systemized approach of looking at everything to see, have you ruled out everything which is causing the problem? And until you've ruled out everything, you really don't know what is the main root cause of the problem.
Yeah, so it's a much more holistic approach to the treatment. Do you have some, I don't know, odd shoulder issue, which is causing you to hold your body in a weird position, which ultimately radiates to your leg, for instance, something like that?
Yeah, precisely. So I would say the more research that's being done, we see the nervous system is largely involved in a lot of these systems. And the nervous system isn't just regulated to the foot or the knee. The nervous system connects all the way down from the spine. So if you're having like a disc issue, you can have subsequent like referral pain that goes down, which is known as sciatica. But that sciatica, if you're only feeling it at the foot and we treat it at the foot and you're not getting better, well, it's because you didn't treat the root cause of where that sciatica is coming from, if it's coming from the back. So like you're saying, it's a full system, like holistic approach. And that I just have to give like thanks to my residency and fellowship training for allowing me to like understand and look at the multiple systems.
Fascinating and interesting. I know that I have pains in certain parts of my body that I'm sure impact others. So you, at some point, you decided to focus your efforts on the skiing. There was another point that I wanted to cover, which was, you talked about it's a year-round practice. Anecdotally, I know a lot of people begin to get injured around this time of year. March, April, end of ski season, where perhaps the snow is slushy and they catch an edge, and all of a sudden, there goes the ACL, or some other kind of injury. Either maybe they're just fatigued, and of course their rehab and recovery needs to take place during the off season. So I'm surprised that it took much doing to require that, but that's healthy, obviously. So your business is year round. Is your practice both in person and remote online, or do you focus exclusively on one or the other?
Yeah, that's a really good question. So actually, funny story, when we had started the business, we were helping a friend out in Hawaii with his in-person clinic. And we were doing that just to make some money, help him out, and then also starting online. So when we hired our business coach, he said, if you go online, you can reach many more people than if you're just talking in person. And he was right. So when we were in Hawaii, I think my following went from like 0 to 9,000 people in 3 months because people wanted the help. And coming back, I was fully expecting to go in person, open a clinic, and do a hybrid model where I would see people online and then see people in person. But because we had done all of our marketing online, there's people from, I thought it would just be the United States that would come reach out to me, but there's people from around the world that reached out to me that was like, hey, Greg, it seems like you have this area of expertise and I can't find that where I live. Can I work with you? So I was like, well, this is really interesting. If I can save on the overhead of not having to rent a space and buy all the gym equipment, and I can still help people from home, yeah, I'll need to change how I treat, which means like I don't really get to do the manual therapy aspect of everything that I was trained for, but it means I can see people around the world when they want and how basically I think I can help them the best. So right now I mostly see people online unless you're in the Seattle area, and I will see people in person occasionally just for like the assessment, but other than that, a lot of what I do is online.
Interesting. So the ability to perform the exercise, or at least you're instructing them on the exercises to perform, and presumably getting feedback on their mobility or lack of mobility in particular joints, et cetera, can all be done remotely, and you basically prescribe, whatever, exercises and other tools, whether it's heat, cold, things like that, compress to help them. Is that am I getting it
Yeah, so
correctly?
where I take over in the rehab process is once people have full range of motion, because earlier in the process, I understand that, hey, you actually may need the hands-on approach to help inhibit your pain, to help restore your range of motion. But once they go there, generally, most of the time, insurance companies will deny them care once they're back to their normal activities of daily living. So, can you shower? Can you take care of yourself? Can you go to work? Can you drive your car? And insurance doesn't really care if you get back to skiing or whatever recreational activities you get back to. But say, for example, someone tore their ACL, it's like, well, I can walk, but I know I want to go back to ski, but if insurance isn't going to allow me to work with my therapist to get back there, it's like, how am I supposed to figure this out on my own? So generally, when people come and work with me, they've been discharged from physical therapy already, and it's basically where I come and we look at what physical therapy did, and then look at what they didn't do, and try and finish off that last sport-specific return to ski aspect to get them back to the hill. And then I haven't seen this anywhere else, but once they're back on the hill, I ultimately want to guide them through the progression on the hill to get them back to skiing how they once were, or even beyond where they once were. So I like to kind of equate it to, if you're playing a sport, it's not like you're just going to go back to scrimmage and then your coach is like, okay, you're great to go back to play full time. It's like your coach is going to get you back to scrimmage, then put you back to play at maybe 25, 50, and then eventually 100%. And even once you're back to playing 100%, your time still could be limited until you get back to it at full function.
Right. So we're talking predominantly about rehab, right? Post-injury recovery and return to sport and return to. But what about prehab, i.e., someone? Well, these things oftentimes aren't planned, but let's talk about prehab in terms of strengthening, joints, muscles, etc., in anticipation of some surgery, whether it's let's say a joint replacement or something along those lines, and then of course there's the maintenance, like in during season, strengthening and the like. Where do you fit in those different aspects?
Yeah, so I would say there's two types of prehab. There's prehab for the ski season, and then there's prehab for a surgical intervention. So let's talk about prehab for the preseason, because in my opinion, I think this is one of the biggest things people can do to prevent injury. And from what I've seen working with the U.S. ski team and the U.S. para ski team, these athletes are prehabbing, or they're doing preseason conditioning to prepare for the demands of skiing. Now, we can't 100% eliminate all the factors of injury through prehab exercise, but what preseason exercise does is reduce your fatigue. It helps you move more efficiently, and when that happens, it means you can drive the skis stronger and reduce your risk of injury. Craig, you said earlier, to your point earlier, like around this time, especially when the snow starts to get slushy, it's when people like haven't been taking care of their bodies because they're like, oh, I'm just skiing, that's good enough. And when you stop strengthening, or if you haven't done any strength and now the snow gets heavier and your body hasn't been prepared for the demands of that heavier snow, that's when you get fatigued faster, and that's when you tend to run into trouble. So anyone that's listening to this, if you already do some preseason training, honestly, I would say it's like less than 20% of the population that does. Most people are like, I'm just going to go ski, or I'm going to ski myself into shape. But the people that really do, I think from everyone that's worked with me, they always say, holy cow, I ski so much stronger than I used to. And it's no doubt that they do, because their body is performing at so much of a higher level.
Yeah. And then what about in season? You talked about obviously getting in strength before the season begins. And I think people probably, always struggle with what should I be doing in season to both maintain strength, but at the same time, in other endurance sports, you talk about tapering before a big event. I know that I wouldn't want to do heavy squats on a Friday before I'm skiing on the weekend, right? Like that's not going to make it enjoyable. So the question is, what's the right amount? What's the Goldilocks scenario?
Yeah, precisely. So I actually model like what I do now based on what I've seen the strength conditioning specialists do with the U.S. ski team. Um, Obviously, if you do a heavy lift before you have competition, your legs are going to be sore. You're not going to be able to perform as much. So generally, my like guideline is, yeah, if you have several days after, even if you skied that day, it would be good for you to do a heavy lift so that way you can maintain your strength during that time. Now, let's say you're skiing like multiple days back to back, right? We have to consider what is the activity of skiing. Skiing is very much of an isometric or like multi-angle isometric, which means like you're in that skier tuck holding that position while your muscles are firing. And then because you take the lift up and you're coming down, it's very much of repetitive eccentric loading where you're controlling yourself falling down the hill. So most of the time when people train, what they do is they train explosiveness, concentric motion, moving forward versus the eccentric or the shock absorption, which is the landing. So on days when we're not skiing, it's really important for us to maintain our ability to absorb shock. So getting into the gym, doing like some jump training where you're jumping down and absorbing the ground rather than really focusing on like the pushing movements. So I like to try and model like strength after you've done skiing, and you're going to have a few rest days, and then on the days where maybe you're have a short rest day but you're going to go and ski again the next day, maybe doing some like light plyometric work or light eccentric work. And then lastly, depends on how much you ski. If you're like a ski patroller or someone that's racing out there and you're doing it every day, really emphasis on recovery between those training days.
It's interesting you point out the differences between what most people would do in the gym. I think you said concentric motion or movements versus the eccentric movements of skiing. And, most people think of going to the gym and doing squats or split squats or lunges or things like that, which I think for the most part, maybe a lunge is eccentric. You're the expert. I'm not. Just in terms of what people think to do versus what they perhaps should be doing at different points in time of the year.
Yeah, I think anyone that's going to the gym to do something from skiing has a leg up on someone that's doing nothing or just skiing themselves into shape. Now, when we go there, we can even be more efficient by focusing on that eccentric portion. And if you think about a lunge is actually both eccentric and eccentric and concentric. A squat is both eccentric and concentric. The eccentric portion is when you're lowering yourself down. The concentric portion is when you're bringing yourself back up. Skiing very much is an eccentric and concentric sport because as you go down from something or as you're making a turn, you're eccentrically loading the legs and then concentrically releasing out of that to get into the next turn. But what we can do is we can bias the eccentric. So we can either overload it by going slower with heavier weight, or we can go faster. If anyone is listening, took physics, force equals mass times acceleration, right? So we're looking at the force of the eccentric. So we can either increase that force by accelerating faster down, or we can increase that force by giving you more mass during that eccentric moment.
Yeah, I don't know that I took physics, but I had a son who did, so I remember the formula just recently.
Yeah.
Interesting. You mentioned your work with the U.S. teams, both sort of was it disabled and non-disabled teams. Let's talk about that. I mean, it's interesting in that you're working with highly talented athletes who are in the gym a lot, effectively year round, to maintain and increase their level of performance. How is that the same, and how is that different than what the average person would or should be doing in their daily lives?
If you look at any Olympian, they dedicate their entire lives to whatever race they're doing, right? Or let's talk about ski racing, to that one moment, and they're chasing gold. So every single moment, whether they're training, whether they're racing, whether they're recovering, is for that very specific moment. Now, us as everyday people, what I will say is a lot of them love skiing. Us as everyday people, we love skiing, but we're not training for that one single moment. But I think what we can do is take a lot of the principles from what Olympic skiers are doing to compete at the highest level and how they're maintaining their body and incorporate that into our own lives. So for the Olympians, in order for them to ski stronger, they weight train. They do training specifically on the dry land to help them increase their performance, ultimately on the ski hill. I think as everyday people, we can do that. I don't think we necessarily need to do it at the intensity in which they're doing it, but we can take some of like the routines that we do. And that's part of what I try and incorporate is the Legacy Club is people, everyday people that want to have that type of training. I'll give that to them so that way they can train like an Olympian, but not for the purpose of that one single moment, but for the purpose of increased performance in which the Olympians are also training for.
And one of the things that I know well is the U.S. Ski and Snowboard's physical fitness or Skills Quest physical fitness testing, which has a variety of different aspects, everything from the dreaded beep test to box jumps to pull-ups and sprints, etc. They all test and effectively train different systems within the body. Like, what is the appropriate mix of cardio versus anaerobic and sort of the other systems that one would work for skiing, again, aimed at the general, population as opposed to the ski racer?
Yeah, I think when you're looking at the testing, they do all these tests to see, hey, is your performance decreasing? Or if your performance is decreasing on the slopes, can we equate that to some of the metrics that we're measuring on dryland? Now, it's almost like you're a robot and you're collecting data, and the more data you have about yourself, the more you can understand like where you're performing poorly or where you're performing better. I think as an everyday person, we definitely do not need to get into that level of detail of testing. But from a testing standpoint, if you're just doing exercises to do exercises and you're kind of just randomly doing them, how do you know if you're making performance gains or not? For myself and the clients that I work with, a lot of the exercise dosing or the exercise programs that we put together is all based on your testing and like where you're weak and where you're strong. So if you're strong in something, I don't need to like give you a triple dose of what you're already strong in. You're just going to make even more like asymmetries or even bias your strengths. What I want to do is I want to work on your weaknesses, and that way we can help bolster those, because as you know, and the listeners know, skiing is very much of a two-legged activity. And if you can turn off one leg but you can't the other, you're not really skiing that well. So from a standpoint of like working through asymmetries and working on weaknesses, I think that's where a lot of my foundation and a lot of the clients that I have, where I kind of lead them into. And then as far as cardiovascular training goes, you can train cardiovascular a few different ways, and I largely think it depends on what type of skiing you're doing, right? So if you're a backcountry skier and you're going uphill, well, that's going to be a lot more demand cardio-wise, like a low load, long endurance cardio to go uphill. But if you think about coming downhill, and especially if you're really like driving, it's high burst of energy in a very quick amount of time. So high intensity interval training is the type of cardio that I would do. Now, as far as like the dosage of like how often you should train cardio to how often you should weight train, I haven't personally read any data on that specifically for skiing. I'm sure there is some data out there, but ultimately I think it's like, one, what does the individual like, and like what are you going to stick with? And I would say the biggest thing that skiers run into, especially when it comes to their training, is either they don't like what they're doing or it's like not effective. So if you don't like weight training, well, that doesn't mean you shouldn't do it at all, but doesn't mean you have to force yourself to do it to have these outcomes. I think doing what you personally like best, whether it's weight training or some form of cardio, or trying to incorporate a combination of the two to help increase your compliance and consistency, is the number one thing that each individual can do to increase their performance.
Interesting. And talking also about the U.S. team, how did you come to work with them? It's for someone who's passionate about skiing, being able to work with the U.S. team, both the non-disabled alpine team and the para alpine team. And I don't know if you work with other teams, whether like cross country or freestyle, etc.
Yeah, totally. So Ever since I was young, I've always loved the Olympics. I think just looking at the best athletes in the world compete at the world stage is just so fascinating to me. I just remember coming home in the summertime and just binge watching everything. Like after school and in the winter, my family would sit down and we'd watch the Olympics when it was happening. So when I went to school, one of my professors mentioned that he had a chance to work with the bobsled team. And I was like, wait, what? I can do that as a physical therapist? And it sparked an interest. In fact, I remember him handing out the applications to our class and said, yeah, if you really want to do this, you can apply for it. You just have to be a physical therapist for 3 years. So I remember holding on to that application, reading through all of it, and I was like, this is so cool. This is something I want to do. So after I finished residency and fellowship, I had an opportunity to help out with the local university club rugby team as kind of a sideline trainer slash physical therapist. And I applied to go to Chula Vista, which is the summer Olympic training facility, on the basis that, hey, the rugby team is training down there. So I got very fortunate and I was accepted, I think 6 months later, to go to a rotation down there. And it was awesome. You get to go see where both the Olympians and the Paralympians train for track and field. Not everyone trains there, but it's a facility where, hey, if they want to live on campus, they have all the resources available to them. The dining hall, the weight training facility, the physical therapist, the coaching, like basically done for you service all in one location. From there, I finished that and I was like, I'm really passionate about skiing and I would love to work with the U.S. ski and snowboard team. So I asked the woman that helped coordinate me to go to the Summer Olympic training facility if she would reach out to the ski team and say, like, hey, there's an individual here that came through for a rotation. He's interested in doing a rotation with the ski and snowboard team. Do you have anything available? And I had been waiting actually for the ski and snowboard team to get back to me for, I think, 2 years. And they said, sorry, right now we're full for the year, but if there's anything that comes up in the future, we'll let you know. So between the time when we started our business and I started working with skiers, I got a notification saying, hey, we would love for you to come out and do a training event with the Women's Alpine Development Team. And I got to do that, I think, in summer of 2022, or sorry, winter of 2022-23. And from there, as a physical therapist, you get added to a medical pool. And essentially how it works is if there's an event that needs coverage, they'll send out an email saying, hey, can anyone cover here? Whoever responds, and then they select a person to go. So I've been very fortunate to help both the able-bodied and the para side, and it's incredible when you get out there just to be able to see these racers of all ages and all abilities just go and crush it and ski really fast, like way beyond my ability level.
That's great. Sounds like a lot of fun. We talked about, working on people's weaknesses as opposed to their strengths. In the para context, obviously their disability may present some different physical limitations or complications. How do you address that? I don't know if that's sort of part of the normal curriculum in physical therapy school, or is that something you learn sort of with on-the-job training? Like, how does that work
Totally.
in real life?
Yeah. So it's definitely not taught in physical therapy school, but in physical therapy school, you do get some neurologic training as well as some orthopedic training. So it means you have to critically think. And I think that's what school does a good job of teaching you, is like, how do you critically think? Because if you get someone that is ski racing, yeah, they're not your typical presentation as someone that had like a traumatic brain injury and you're helping them get back to walking. You're helping them go down the ski hill and perform at like the highest rate. I actually had a good conversation with one of the coaches about this, and a lot of the people with neurologic disorders actually can have an advantage for going down the hill because, for example, let's talk about cerebral palsy. Like cerebral palsy, you have different abnormalities of tone, which means that some muscles can be really tonic, which means they're really, really tight and guarded and they don't really move, and some can be flaccid. Well, if that individual's tone helps them drive the skis, as a physical therapist, you're usually like, oh, well, the abnormal tone is bad because we want more range of motion. But if I was to decrease that, it could actually decrease their performance going down the hill. So in that sense, you really have to critically think what the athlete needs. And in that case, what I'll do is I'll talk to the strength conditioning coach, I'll talk to their actual ski coach, and I'll talk to the individual, and I'll say, hey, what have you done in the past that's really helped you? And what can we do to try and facilitate what has helped you in the past, and what has not helped you, so that way I don't give you something that's going to like decrease your performance. That's specifically for like the neurologic issues. And then for like individuals that maybe are double amputees, they're sit skiers, or maybe they're a single amputee and they only have one leg when they ski. You just have to get really creative with, okay, I know the mechanics of skiing and your body has to do this in order to ski in the way that you ski. Well, how can we break that down to the micro level and make adjustments so that way it can help increase your performance or help you recover?
Interesting. Yeah. So you basically adapt what an able-bodied person would perform for, the limitations or restrictions that a para athlete might have, and adapt them.
Yeah, very much so. I would say from anyone that works on the para side, I think as a physical therapist, it challenges your critical thinking a lot more, because you're like, okay, this is how an able body would perform, and we want you to be able to perform in this way, but here are the limitations based on your disability, or maybe because you don't have that limb there. So how can we give you the most advantage based on like your ailment to help you perform the best?
Yeah. I find all these things very interesting, which is why I like having these conversations, and hopefully others who are listening do as well. Let's shift gears a little bit and talk about your, I guess, delivery of physical therapy services, and perhaps more broadly your following, to put it I guess bluntly, in terms of on Instagram and via your podcast. You've basically built, I gather, your business with the premise of reaching as many people as widely, globally as possible, and I think that's most evident to the casual observer via your Instagram, because you're a prolific poster and have a lot of content. So let's talk. Was that a conscious choice at the outset, or was that just a natural outgrowth of your chosen business model?
Yeah, so when we first got started in business, our coach, and I mentioned this earlier, said like, how many people can you talk to in a day, like in person? And I was like, well, if I'm like in front of like a big group, maybe 500 to 1,000. And he's like, that's amazing that you can do that. But imagine you can get like 10,000, 100,000, a million eyeballs on you. And it, like, you don't have to always be in front of them. It can basically like go in front of them at any point. And he says that is the power of social media, and the best part is no one is charging you to make videos. So what he said to me is, what I would highly recommend is, you need to understand like what your audience wants, and when you consistently serve your audience and give them what they want and help them, and don't expect anything back in return, you're going to get a lot of eyeballs on what you want, because no one else is doing that. So I try and go on social media every day. I try and either answer questions or create content based on the needs of people. Every Wednesday, I do this thing called Ask Me Anything Wednesday, where people respond and ask me what they want. So I look at and see, it's like, hey, are there trends in the questions that I've gotten from the month of March? And if there are, it's like, hey, let's repost some of the old content so people that didn't see it last year can see it now. Or if there's new questions, it's like, oh, I haven't answered that yet. I need to keep building content. So that way, basically, my goal is whenever anyone asks a question, I'll either have the content already done, or if it's not done, I'm building out this entire library of all the questions skiers would ask. So that way I have the resources available to them and I can help them in any way that they need.
Interesting. And is simply posting content, I don't mean to minimize it by saying simply, but is simply posting content the means to that growth, or were there other things that you've done to expand to, what is it, 180 plus thousand followers on Instagram, which to me, sounds pretty impressive.
Yeah, I think there's a difference between just posting content versus understanding the needs of what the people want and then posting the content. Because I can create reels for capturing attention and I can grow my following quite well because people think things are funny, but that's not the kind of delivery and that's not the kind of model that I'm going for. What I want ultimately is for when I do serve someone, even if my audience was only 1,000 people, but if someone comes to my page and they consume everything and they're like, holy cow, this is really good. Greg is basically the one that knows everything about ski rehab, which means that if I need help in the future, even if I'm not hurt now, if I need help in the future, he's served me in so many different ways. He's answered already so many of my questions that I want to go to him because he's the person that I trust or that I feel like knows the most about what's going on. So I would say it's really not about like the size, and like I think my size has really just grown because there is a need in the marketplace and no one is doing this year round. But I think ultimately it's about serving the people, and that's what's really helped me grow the most, and being consistent in like giving them what they need like often.
And is the growth linear, or is it a hockey stick, i.e. that you got to some point and all of a sudden it took off on an exponential basis?
No, you'll see it's definitely it's a roller coaster. Around ski season, or as people are ramping up for ski season, that's definitely when I tend to grow the most. I think just because however the Instagram algorithm works, it knows people are searching for ski material. And in the off season, it definitely tapers off where I won't see like much growth at all. But like I said, it's not about the growth, it's about serving people and the audience that I already have, right? So if I'm not growing, if I'm not growing from like 150,000 to 180,000 that I have right now, it's okay because I still have 150,000 people that I'm still serving, and I get the opportunity to answer all those questions that they've asked in the past that I haven't actually gotten a chance to answer. I get a chance to catch up on those and help the people work where they're at. So I always see it as, there's opportunity for growth, but if I'm not moving the needle forward, it's not necessarily going backwards unless like my people, like the eyeballs that are watching my stuff, is going down.
Right. And what are some surprising things, as a result of having as many followers as you do, in terms of whether people messaging you or following you, or there's probably a few instances where you're like, geez, that's an interesting, or I wouldn't have expected that. Any kind of surprising things that stand out to you over the past several years?
Yeah, I mean, I think everyone that has a big following, like, eventually will get recognized. And I would like to say I'm a fairly humble person. And when I go to places, they're like, "Oh my gosh, are you the ski PT?" And I'm like, "Yeah, that's me. I'm just like a ordinary person that helps people." But it's cool to be able to see people like on the hill. And I would say the best part about it is not only like am I helping them in like a way that like they receive the help and they like are able to move forward, but because I'm so passionate about skiing, every single person that I see on the ski hill is kind of like my friend too. It's like, "Oh, you like to ski? I like to ski," and then we can kind of just chit chat about skiing. And when you're super passionate about like what you do for work and rehab, and you're super passionate about the hobby, it makes it really, really fun.
Yeah, I think one of the awesome things about the sport is that it is a warm and generally inclusive community, right? Riding up a chairlift with a stranger can be a terrific experience, right? If you're not bashful or shy, you can open up and have a conversation with a complete stranger, and you know that you have at least one thing in common, which is that you are enjoying skiing or snowboarding. And so the fact that you're recognized, I imagine, opens up those conversations even more.
Yeah, totally. And I don't try and seek out those opportunities. Like there's been times when I've been riding the chair and people are like, "Oh, so what do you do for work?" And I say, "Oh, I do physical therapy and I help skiers." And they're like, "Oh, are you the ski PT?" And I was like, "Yeah, that's me." It's funny how many of those conversations that I have.
That's terrific. So your business obviously must grow significantly as a result of the following. Your courses are online, and I've been to your website and looked at the various programs that you have. Some of it is, for those that need, post injury rehab, and then there are others where, it's your 16-week program to get strong, preseason, generally speaking, but I guess, could be leveraged at any point in time. Like, what are the various call products and services that you're offering?
Yeah, totally. So I started by offering one-on-one coaching, and that's for people who really just want the most time with me. So like once or multiple times a week, I'll meet with the client to understand, like, all right, what are their goals? What are they trying to get to? And how can I help them get there? Most of those clients are either people that are recovering from an injury and they feel like they're not getting the service that they need where they are at. Maybe they've been discharged from physical therapy and they want to get back to the ski hill. Or the third clientele are people that see like what I do online from a performance standpoint, and they say, hey, Greg, I don't want to go through your 16-week program. I want you to write one that's custom to me. So that's basically what one-on-one would be. And one-on-one definitely is not like cheap. It's like it's definitely an investment to work with me. But for the people that do want to do that, I try and deliver the highest quality like care and type of service that I get, because you get a lot of time with me. What I realized is, as I've started to get more and more clients that want to work with me one-on-one, it's impossible for me to serve myself because I can't duplicate myself, right? So I could have gone two ways. I could have hired on someone else, but I was like, I don't know if the other person has the knowledge or the skill to do what I do right now. And I'm sure there's people out there. I just have to find them and vet them and make sure that they're qualified. But the other thing is, I realized, well, maybe someone wants to come to work with me, but they can't afford to work with me one-on-one. What is an alternative option that I can give where it's way more affordable? They can still get the same results, but they don't have to work with me one-on-one. And that is the Legacy Club, where it's $40 a month with a free 2-week trial, where I take the people through my system that I would do exactly with what I would do with my one-on-one clientele, but it's more of a, hey, you need to figure out these things on your own and then send me the information so I can help you analyze it, versus I do it all for you and then I help you analyze the information. So those are the main two ways that I work with people: one-on-one coaching or in the Legacy Club. And in the end, the goal is to get you to like the result that you want. So whether you want to ski stronger, whether you want to rehab from an ACL tear, the idea or the principle is that there are resources available for you.
Yeah. And let me ask somewhat of an ignorant question, which is, how does rehabbing from injury is obviously, a physical therapy, requirement. But someone who wants to ski stronger, how does what you're offering and your services differ from, a fitness trainer, someone who isn't trained in physical therapy? What is the differences?
Yeah, so great question. I think it really takes an individual to understand like what type of training they want. A general fitness trainer, and there are some people that train specifically for skiing, but I would say what separates me is my expertise in kind of the mechanics of skiing and understanding the biomechanics of the body. So when we talk about asymmetries from side to side, oftentimes a ski patroller a ski instructor can identify, it's like, oh, you turn better off your right leg compared to your left. And they may attribute it to a technique thing. But when you come on dry land and you're like, yeah, I turn stronger to my right versus the left, I can look and see like, okay, well, how is your ankle moving? How is your knee moving? Do you have the mobility? Do you have the strength? Do you have the performance and the control to ultimately drive that ski? And if you don't have that, that's very easy to build a program for you based on the things that we've identified. Whereas when you go to a general fitness trainer, they're not looking at those specific things. They just say, oh, you want to ski stronger? I'll design a program to make you stronger. But that doesn't necessarily address your asymmetries.
Understood. Okay. One thing we haven't touched on yet is you're also a podcaster. And I've listened to a few. You have quite a lot. They are geared more to, correct me if I'm wrong, physical therapists or people. It's a little bit more detailed in the weeds, or am I getting that? Who's the audience?
Yeah, totally.
Let's put it that way.
So when I was injured, I felt like I was kind of isolated on my own, and I didn't really have the resources to figure out where I wanted to go. And as I've interviewed more and more people and talked to more people, I've realized a lot of people mentally kind of get in this rut where it's like, oh, I tore my ACL. I don't know if I'm ever going to be able to get back to skiing. So the premise of the podcast is twofold. One, it's to interview people that have gone through the process ask them about how they've overcome the challenges to help people that are currently going through it to maybe use some of the techniques that they use to get to the end goal, and then ultimately like show that, hey, there is a light at the end of the tunnel. This person actually destroyed their knee way worse than you did, and they're a professional skier and they're back to jumping off like 100-foot cliffs. It's like, if they can do that and their knee was worse, I can do that. The second part of it is to interview people that are kind of in the industry. So people that are physical therapists, maybe they're orthopedic surgeons, to answer some of the questions around, like, if you have to go to rehab, like, what are the best interventions? Or if you have a mental like breakdown, what are the things that you can do? Or as a nutritionist, what are the things that I can eat to help boost my recovery? So it's really surrounded on the individual that's going through the recovery process. And when you're recovering, I know there's a lot of downtime of like, hey, what can I be doing? So I just try and interview people that have overcome challenges through the ski hill, whether it's injury or if they're part of the para team, like how have they overcome their challenges to ultimately make the team, to help motivate people through that.
Terrific. Got it. I will give a few more of them a listen, but hopefully I won't have an injury that necessitates my listening all too much.
Yeah, and if you do, like, one of the other things that I found, like when I went through my injury process, is I felt really isolated. Like, no one else really understood my injury because they hadn't gone through it, and also because my friends were in the middle of ski season. They're like, well, we're going to keep skiing. We're not just going to stay home with you, Greg, because we feel bad for you. So I created a group called Ski Habilitation. It's a Facebook group for other people that are going through that injury process. Maybe they're just injured, to get support from other people that are currently going through it, and just to also like post wins in there too. Because I think when you're like going through it and you're like, no one cares if you go from 90 degrees to 100 degrees of knee bending after rehab, but when someone is there and you're like, oh my gosh, I just did that last week, congratulations, it's like a huge milestone to see other people progressing as well.
It's a group support.
Yeah, exactly.
That's terrific. Well, listen, thank you very much. I guess I should ask you, how would I do as a more established podcaster? How'd I do?
Honestly, Craig, I would say I'm not established. I just love to have conversation, and I think organic conversations are the best way to just get to know people. So yeah, you're doing great, man. Keep it up. It's all about consistency.
Yeah, that I know. Well, listen, thank you very much for joining me today. It's a fascinating conversation, and certainly, I think everybody has questions as to what can they be doing, more of or better in terms of to improve their performance skiing, whether it's lasting to the end of the day or not being fearful of some more difficult runs because they're physically challenging, et cetera. So, your work is critical and essential to everyone's enjoyment and well-being. So thank you for that.
Yeah, absolutely. And if you're looking to find more of what I do, you may be able to find me on Instagram, SkiPT. And if you want to listen to the podcast that I host, it's called the Legacy Podcast, Legaski, short for Legacy Rehab and Performance Skiing.
Terrific. I will link those things in the show notes. And once again, thank you very much, Greg, for joining me today.
Yep. You guys have a good one and stay safe on slopes.
Well, thank you for listening to another episode of Fresh Corduroy. This episode with Greg was really interesting for me. I like listening to experts in their field, and in this case, with respect to physical therapy and fitness. I can say for sure that I learned a few things that I'm going to incorporate into my fitness routine. I hope you can as well. And if you're so inclined, go visit his website, which I'll drop in the show notes in terms of a link, and take a look at what his offerings are. I think it always benefits people to get stronger and more physically fit for skiing as well as for every other endeavor in life. It was also really interesting to me to learn about his business growth and his mission and accomplishments as it pertains to developing an online presence and being able to sell his products globally. As a burgeoning content creator myself, It's something that I obviously aspire to and hopefully will benefit from as well. If you liked what you heard today, please don't forget to like and subscribe. Leave any comments that you have on the app that you're listening to the show, and I will respond as quickly as I can. And of course, if you have any suggestions, don't hesitate to reach out as well. Thanks again for listening. See you on the next one. Intro and outro music is by Craig Zolan from his album Calder's Universe, which can be found on Spotify.